to be present here, to be able to speak to you, so many pharmaceutical students from all over Europe. As you may know, I'm a pharmacist myself by training, and so I'm very glad that you are going proactively towards environmentally friendly pharmaceuticals, which is very close to my heart. I'm a member in the ENVI committee, as you are too, and I'm a substitute member in the Industry Research Energy Committee and in the Transport Committee. And so I must do this shortly off topic. I would really love to see the image of a train, not a plane, when you speak about mobility in your sheets, which I noticed in Mihai's presentation, because of course this is also part of sustainability. And first I would like to share with you my own experience during university education. That was back in the 80s, when environmental issues were just starting to be addressed at all. And I remember that we had a textbook on pharmaceutical technology where the problem of fluorohydrocarbons being a problem for the ozone layer was actually addressed, but then the assessment was, well, those substances are so incredibly useful, we cannot just ban them for some environmental purpose. And the same goes with the blessing of oral contraception, because ethinyl estradiol, as you probably know, just runs through each wastewater plant and accumulates in our waterways. But it was the same assessment. Well, this is such an incredibly useful substance, so we shouldn't care too much about the hormone impact on our environment. So I'm glad that we are some steps further today, and that the focus on, but still the focus on human health has not yet sufficiently been widened, because human health, of course, is closely interconnected with a healthy environment. We need clean water to drink, we need clean air to breathe, we need fertile soils, and all this can be impacted by pharmaceuticals or other substances which we're releasing in the environment. Well, after having completed my studies, I was actually in a public community pharmacy, so I'm well aware of the role that pharmacists play in advising patients which come for advice. Often they come for medical advice which we cannot give, which we are not trained to give, but all the same, it's just easier to go to the next pharmacy than going to the doctor, getting an appointment, waiting for hours, whatever. So we have a crucial role in interacting with the patients, because often pharmacists are the first point where patients turn to whenever they have a question. And so, of course, pharmacists have an important role in the health system and also in sustainability, which Irina has already mentioned, because it's up to pharmacists to give advice to patients how to handle pharmaceuticals, how to take care of pharmaceuticals which they don't need anymore, and also playing that role towards research in industry, just by mirroring back our experience, because often research makes some assumptions which are not really correlated to reality, and it's an important role to mirror back reality to research, saying, well, that's a nice assumption, but in reality people come to me telling me that they use, for example, old pharmaceuticals, I'd really have that, to treat their pets, which is a nice idea in order not to throw away things, but it's maybe not the most intelligent thing to do. And so we have a lot of tasks where the pharmacist, who is at the frontier between patient, research, industry, university, has to make sure that all information is going the right way. And so I'm also glad that this panel is very diverse in the field of policymakers, but also people who are actually doing research. Later in my life, we opened a family laboratory, and first we focused on pollutants in the surroundings, mainly indoors. That was the time when there was still pentachlophenol being used for wood preservation, which we now know is highly hepatotoxic, is highly cancerogenic. but which had been used for decades, and people just got sick inside their homes and never knew why. And then later we turned to performing studies for the registration of chemicals, with a focus on the ecotoxicological impact as well as biodegradation, mutagenicity, these sort of things. And as you probably know, pharmaceuticals didn't have to be tested for these things up to 2006. So we have thousands of substances which are on the market being used widely, where we really don't even know anything about the relevant environmental endpoints. And in my view, we really need a roadmap. That was done for chemicals with the REACH program, where where the chemical industry had to adhere to certain deadlines in order to provide this information for their substances, which had been on the market before 1980, when the first chemical law came into force. And I think for pharmaceuticals, we need a roadmap just in the same manner, looking at the high volume pharmaceuticals first, and the, let's call it orphan drugs last, because they are not used in such a large fashion. And of course, we also have to look at the patients, because we have in this approach, which is made by the Commission on the Pharmaceutical Strategy, the patients are addressed, but they are also particularly vulnerable. So we have to look at their needs and their concerns, and these questions are vital. But I don't know whether education in pharmacy has changed very much, because when I was in university, we learned a lot about chemistry, a lot about biology, microbiology, technology, pharmacology, toxicology, but we never learned any communication skills, which would have been a good idea, actually, which I only found out after having completed my education, of course, standing in the pharmacy and trying to figure out how am I going to handle this person with a very specific problem. I'm not skilled for that, I'm not trained for that, I don't know how to bring the message across, which I really wanted to bring across to this person. And I would really love to see that this sort of communication skills, but also other soft skills, would be part of the curricula in the future, if they are not now, but I don't believe they are, or at least not in the relevant scope. So we need more training, we need more education, which brings me back to the lifelong learning, which you have mentioned, and I think you really can fill a gap there, at least as long as it's not in the curricula. You could spring into that gap and say, well, we'll provide it to our students at least, so they can really have a proper approach to this problem, because of course communication skills are different if you want to sell something or if you want to give advice. That's a totally different approach. So I really encourage the pharmaceutical faculties across Europe to take this road, and I'm glad that your commitment and your pledge are really visible to go there, and if there's a will, there's a way. And I'm also glad that there are initiatives which are focused on preserving nature, preserving the planet, because, as I said, pharmaceuticals, although of course they are beneficial to humans, must not be excluded from this exercise. And as I said, I'm part of the ENVI committee, and the event today should really find its way into our parliamentary body, because the obstacles and the possible solutions can be best addressed by those who are at the front every day encountering exactly these obstacles. And I will try to keep working on this matter in the future, because we're still at baby steps when it comes to pharmaceuticals in the environment, and we have to really get further. We have to look that there's not a single active ingredient entering the environment, but we have a cocktail. And as you very well know from treating humans, you have the effects of active ingredients interacting with each other in the human body, and of course they do the same in the environment. That's obvious. We will be discussing it in the ENVI committee on Thursday, and addressing the Commission's strategic approach, and also voting on amendments. And in my opinion, the Commission's approach is too soft, because it's lacking the precautionary principle, which should be at the base of all our policy making, and also the polluter pays principle. The release of pharmaceuticals in the environment is either the main routes are wastewater from treatment of humans or animals, and of course wastewater of production. And there we have this often neglected issues of the endocrine disruptors, because a lot of active ingredients have endocrine disrupting properties, and up to now of many of these substances we don't even know whether they can display these endocrine disrupting properties at very low concentrations as we can find them in wastewater. And often the activated sludge of the wastewater treatment plants is still just brought out in the field for nutrition purposes, and these environmental impacts have to be included in the benefit risk assessment. I agree with you there, because we do it in veterinary medicine, but we're not doing it for human health, and that doesn't really make sense. And the relevant EU directives have to be revised in due time. I just mentioned sewage sludge. We have a sewage sludge directive which came into force in the year when I started my university education, which is quite some time ago, 1986 to be precise. So it might be high time to revise this directive, taking into account what substances can be present in sewage sludge today. And last but not least, I believe the Commission really must take action in order to include environmental criteria in the good manufacturing practice framework. The GMP framework is at the moment only looking at, do we produce pharmaceuticals in a responsible way? Are we paying attention to everything that may happen during production? Are all the release studies being made properly? Do we have the 4 eyes principle in every production site and all that? But we don't look at all at environmental issues. And the Swedish government has demanded it, the German Environmental Office has demanded it. We have to include this, because you probably know that most antibiotic ingredients today are produced at Hyderabad in India, or at least a large portion of them. And the Musi River, which is running through Hyderabad, is a breeding hotspot for multi-resistant bacteria. And the farmers use this water for irrigation, for example, so these bacteria are spread virtually everywhere. Before entering Parliament, I was working in quality management of a hospital, and we had this nice little sheet: which patients do you have to test for multi-resistant bacteria upon entering the hospital? And of course they have been in hospital in the last half year, they're coming from a nursery home and all that, but they also has this patient been in India in the last 6 months? Because 70% of the tourists traveling to India come back with multi-resistant bacteria. They don't fall sick, of course, because if you have a healthy immune system, it'll take care of these bacteria, but it's an entry, not a door, but a really big gate for these very, very problematic bacteria, and that's a serious danger for the health of citizens. So I'm very glad that you're joining us in our initiative to making this strategic approach better, because what we are all striving for is, of course, the health of citizens, else you wouldn't have chosen this truly demanding education, and I'm really glad to have been here. And as Arena, I do have other appointments this afternoon, so I will have to leave pretty soon. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, danke. Yes, I will actually follow up on your point in regards to education and pharmaceutical studies. There is quite many things that are lacking, including communicational skills and soft skills, digitalization, availability of mobility opportunities, and many others. So yes, we do also advocate for inclusion of soft skills, and we will be releasing an annex to our methodology booklet on it. So yes, we are active on it, and we have it checked. But thank you as well. Now I will give the floor to the next speaker from the Commission, from DG Environment. It's Cornelia Rudolph.
Yes, good afternoon. We already heard a lot about our approach to pharmaceuticals in the environment. Nonetheless, my presentation basically first gives an overview of what is actually in our approach. I'm not sure if everyone knows this, so I will just give an overview and then a little bit of what we have as an example followed up on our side, and happy of course to discuss afterwards. Okay. So first, where is the strategic approach to pharmaceuticals in the environment based? So it's based under the Water Framework Directive and the daughter directives, where one of which is the Environmental Quality Standards Directive, and there it says that the Commission has to come up with such an approach. And oops, sorry, that way, okay. As already heard, we adopted this about a year ago. And of course, since then, the Commission has worked on implementing all the things that are mentioned in it. It has 4 objectives. One is to address the potential risks. So like the environmental risk assessment we already heard about, monitoring challenges. The second one is innovation and circular economy, like green manufacturing, waste disposal, all the areas of the circular economy we hear about a lot right now. Then there are, of course, knowledge gaps we need to fill, like the AMR development in the environment, or the effect of mixtures in the environment. And the 4th point, which is very important, we also heard already, is to ensure the access to safe medicines for humans as well as animals. These 4 objectives are then followed by about 30 specific actions in 6 key areas. I just want to mention a couple of them. So the first area is the prudent use of pharmaceuticals for guidance for healthcare professionals. We already heard cooperation with international organizations like the WHO. And one of the points I want to mention here specifically is to explore, in cooperation with relevant stakeholders, how environmental aspects could become part of medical training and professional development programs, which is basically what you're trying to do today. And I would really like to hear your opinions on this and how we can move forward on that point. The second one is to develop less harmful pharmaceuticals and green manufacturing, for instance, funding research, the best available techniques under the Industrial Emissions Directive, and as far as possible, also to look at third country manufacturing, although of course it's out of our area we can actually manage. The third one is the environmental risk assessment we already heard, so improve the environmental risk assessment. Also these legacy substances, how can we deal with the environmental risk assessment of which are still missing. The 4th one is waste management, where of course the wastewater stream and the sludge stream is also looked at, but also collecting schemes of unused pharmaceuticals in hospitals and in the public. The 5th one is the monitoring in all environmental areas, so water, soil, biota, and also trying to monitor antimicrobial resistance, which is kind of a challenge. And there we have, at the last thing, again, the knowledge gaps, like AMR in the environment or chronic exposure to mixtures. Now I want to give a short example of what DG Environment, especially the unit I work in, has done, or we're right now doing actually, is that we're looking for the watch list. The watch list is a list under the Environmental Standards Directive, where we put well, now pharmaceuticals, chemicals that the member states have to monitor. And we are now trying to include in this antibiotics, antidepressants, hormonal drugs, and other pharmaceuticals, but this is still in the discussion with the member states. Hopefully, we have to come to a decision mid of this year. And after that, we are looking at a second list, which is called the priority substances list, where then actually there are threshold values for substances, where we are also discussing with all the member states to include pharmaceuticals in these lists. And now I give over to my colleague from Santi to change it.
Yes, thank you. Now I would like to welcome the next speaker, also from the Commission, from DG Sante. It's Ms. Marina Silvia Lungu.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here and to see the young generation of pharmacists interested in this topic. And I'm happy that we all work together with from different angles to share today with you some of the steps forward in this file. So I work in DG Sante, and we are working in a close collaboration with my colleague from DG Environment on this file. In DG Sante, we are two units that manage the pharmaceuticals legislation, and we monitor the implementation overall, not only in relation to the authorization of medicines, but also in relation to other aspects like clinical trials and other elements in relation to the human health. So in relation to this file, you have heard that the problem definition of this would be traces of pharmaceuticals in the environment, and we work together in order to have a cleaner environment with our colleagues in DG Environment. And it's not a new topic, as you have heard also from our more experienced colleagues from the Parliament. In previous times it was discussed and continues to be, but now today we have an increased awareness of this, so we take more action, and we are there to further go on and implement this strategic approach. So we need to have indeed more information on the monitoring of these pharmaceuticals, of residues in the environment, and to see what are the threats of antimicrobial resistance in the environment. It's an important topic for my DG to work further on the AMR issues, and this actually initiative is closely related to the One Health approach for the AMR. So in terms of the what are the actions that we do, so this approach, as Cornelia presented, is addresses the whole life cycle of pharmaceuticals. So on our side, on DG Sante, that we are closely associated in this exercise, we look and work in the area of healthcare professionals, and when monitoring the legislation on pharmaceuticals, how we can address it by sharing best practices, further improve the guidelines we already have, and also link with all the stakeholders, member states, healthcare professionals, and even training. So for this, in the identified actions, we also saw that further collaboration at EU and international level must be further increased, and to improve indeed further on the understanding of certain uncertainties in the knowledge gaps. So in the 6 areas of actions, then I can say that so far we have carried out, since it was adopted, we have had meetings and learned from different stakeholders, including from both sides, so from the industry side, but also from the NGOs, to learn what are their views and how we can proceed further. And on my side, we are working in close connection with the member states, so we have further presented this in our pharmaceutical committee, and there is a high interest in this. So we have a working group that was established with experts from 10 member states, including our agency, the European Medicine Agency. So we work together in identifying now further actions and recommendations to share best practices from their expert level. Including the training, as we said, increasing and promotion of the awareness of how to use prudently the pharmaceuticals, but also on how to address further on the greener manufacturing, on the GMP aspects, as well as the environmental risk assessment and how to improve it. So as I said, it is for us directly linked with the One Health Action Plan against the AMR, and for this we have worked closely with our partners that work on the international files. So we have presented to our partners in China and India. We have it on the agenda, and we further discuss with them. So how to increase awareness on these elements, and how to let's say to go further in identifying like common ways to address the issues also in other countries. And in terms of the actions we have carried out and the state of play, as I said, we have carried out at different levels, at the EU level, at international level, and we are committed, as you saw, through our approach to be implemented in such a way as to bridge it also with the Commission communication also on the Green Deal and our priorities. So we are working together in evaluating that and further implement it. In case you have further questions, I mean, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you very much. Before we move to the next speaker, I would like to ask the panel to take a picture with us before our lovely MEPs leave us. So we have the proof that this happened.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this lovely break. Now we will continue with Mr. Bastian Luhisch from RIFM.
Could I get a microphone? I'll be walking around. You have no microphone? Normally my voice is loud enough, but maybe due to coronavirus it's not. You will know after the week is finished. Right. First of all, I'm with the National Institute of Public Health and the Environment. We're mainly dealing with coronavirus now. That's totally not what I do. I have a background in pharmaceutical sciences and chemistry, and I'm occupying myself mostly with falsified medicines, which you mentioned briefly, which is of great interest to me. Medical devices, whatever is on the market, but also the chemistry kind, what is coming out of implants. And this came upon my path a couple of years ago, and I'd like to take you through that, but not before thanking you for having me. It's really great, and I totally agree with the other speakers. It's great to see interest on sustainability within this domain. That's great. This is how it started for us at the Official Medicines Control Laboratory for the Netherlands. We were confronted with images like this in 2015, 2016, and that's when we thought, why are these people using this imagery? Why are they publishing on medicines? This is our business. we're not throwing pills in nice little creeks like that. Why do they call a report no pills? There was quite some animosity at that point between the domains because there was a huge misunderstanding and miscommunication. And from our perspective, what we are being taught in school, in schools of pharmacy, is that the medicines chain, it runs from the manufacturer to the point where it's being handed to the patient, and that's it. That's where it ends. But to us, it was quite an epiphany to realize it does not end there at all. Either it goes down the bin, and for the Netherlands it means that being incinerated only, we don't have landfills anymore. This is of course the most common way. It's excreted in feces or urine. Then it goes to the wastewater treatment plant, which is not designed to deal with persistent medicines, because I'm a drug designer myself. I used to design drugs to be persistent, else it would not do a proper job in your body. It would completely disintegrate. There's a solution to that: increase the dose. But does that help the environment? No, because then you will excrete more. So greener APIs is not a simple solution. And then you can return medicines. That's an interesting one. It's being mentioned here as well. Do you have processes in place for that? Who's going to pay for that? Yeah, those are all real-time issues right now. And don't underestimate the amount of medicines that come back to the pharmacy. It can be huge. And it's also a security risk. We have a couple of people standing trial in the Netherlands because they've been stealing out of whatever is coming back to the pharmacy. Because, you know, old people, they use opioids, they use benzodiazepines, they die. Unused meds come back to the pharmacy. Well, that's nice. So there's always people that see opportunity somewhere. A couple of years ago we did an estimation, and it was a really, really conservative estimation as to how much API, unchanged excreted API, ended up in surface water in the Netherlands. And we came to a low estimate of 140 tons. Well, don't quote me on this, but I think it's way more than that. It's probably 500 tons or even more. This does not have X-ray contrast fluids in it. But this one, we chose a low number to start a conversation. And if we're challenged on this number, we can make it stick. But in reality, it's much higher. And this does not include what doctors do in their practice. If they throw out something, or they apply lidocaine in a syringe, there's a little left in the syringe, they empty it in the sink. That's common practice. And also at the dentistry, it is common practice. If you're becoming a hospital pharmacist, they ask you to make a certain solution. You want to be efficient, you make a big solution. And if it's not done at the end of the day, you have to pay for every kilogram of waste. So we noticed that some hospitals are very efficient in their waste. And since medicines are exempted from REACH regulations, even as a waste they are exempted. And this is really interesting because they enter a different regulatory domain, but they keep the special status from the domain where it started in. That's sort of the transubstantiation, if you know what that is. Right. This also, one that is not here, that is, you can retrieve phosphate from urine. So in terms of recycling. But if you start collecting urine and you crystallize phosphates, you have medicines residues in your phosphates. If you start to use it as fertilizer, you have an issue. Diapers, also solid waste, a lot of solid waste. If you become a pharmacist, most of your stock will be diapers and incontinence pads. incontinence pads mainly. If you start harvesting used incontinence pads for recycling purposes, which is easily done, because it's a huge weight, that's great, but it has medicines residues. What to do with it? You want to make paper cups that have these residues, that's stuff to think about, new sort of problems. In the Netherlands, we didn't like the people from the water world at first, and they didn't like us. We didn't understand each other. They used words that we didn't understand or we perceived differently. And I like the fact that communication has been mentioned a couple of times. I think this is really fundamental. The title of my presentation was Building Bridges, but it actually means translating. You have to be aware of what kind of words people in another domain speak and what they actually mean by that. They don't necessarily mean the same thing that you have in your mind. So ask a question, what do you mean? And explain what you mean when you say something. So in the Netherlands, we all sat around, we set up round tables where everybody was involved, and of course the first couple of meetings there were fallouts between people from the environment, people from the pharmaceuticals, arguments flying back and forth about what's reasonable, what's not reasonable. You from the health department, you just want to poison everybody. Stuff like arguments like that. If you enter such a debate, be prepared that might happen, but that's not a bad thing per se. It's just a chance to stay in conversation, to get the debate going, and to gain some trust. So in our chain approach, everybody from the manufacturer, actually the innovator, is represented until the patient, and we have all sorts of initiatives going. And we have agreements on some principles. All the domains, including the pharmaceutical domain, and this is really important, we accept that pharmaceutical residues pose a problem. There's a lot of weird scientific data on a fish becoming autistic. That's not the kind of things that we want to see, because you cannot, that's not scientifically sound. But you can't ignore that there is an issue. And we also acknowledge that all the domains involved have a role in reducing the residues. However, we should act within our own capacities. We should not be arguing. 1 minute left, goodness. We should not be pointing fingers. You should do that. You should do that. No, you should start for yourself. And we should start on real issues. Well, a couple of things we also agreed. Medicines will not be banned just because of ecotoxicology. However, wouldn't it be a smart thing to do to every now and then think, what medicines do we have on the market? Oh, this has been out on the market for 15 years. Did it really bring us what we thought it would bring? Does it still have the added value that we saw when we approved it? That system does not exist in Europe right now, but revisiting the approvals could be something, because if it's not really effective and it does pose a threat to the environment, then there's a window of opportunity to do something. We also agreed no ecotox warnings on packaging. This is still a matter of debate, because ECHA, the Chemicals Authority, is still trying to get microplastics warnings on packaging. Imagine what that would do to patient compliance. Warning, this product contains microplastics. And it's well intended, but it's not ideal. And we certainly don't want wild substitution experiments. I can talk for hours on those experiments that went on in the Netherlands, all well intended. No diclofenac, but naproxen, but all of these experiments were ill-designed and actually put people at risk. So, our challenges, and it's my last slide: build and maintain mutual trust. We know that we have to improve our wastewater treatment. We have to reduce and prevent waste. This has been mentioned a couple of times, the role of the environmental risk assessment in the benefit risk. Does it have a role? What should the role be? How important do we want to make it? This is a really important one. There is ecotox data, but it's not really accessible because it resides with the evaluation boards, so it's not open to researchers. And then there's this feasibility of green air APIs that needs attention. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I open the floor for discussion. We have panel discussion with questions from the audience and hopefully answers from the panel. You're busy, it's busy time. Thanks again. Yes, so questions. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, hello, my name is Nils Doessin. I work for MSD. Just a question. I was wondering whether you, well, maybe it's a question for the Commission or maybe our Dutch colleague, whether you see green public procurement for pharmaceuticals as a mean to actually address pharmaceutical environment. And I've heard, so we know that Norway is looking into this. They have some experience, Sweden as well. I heard that in the Netherlands there is a pilot project going on. So if you can elaborate a bit on that and your views, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
I'm afraid I have to disappoint you there. I'm also aware that there is an experiment going on the procurement, but I have no clue where it's at this point. I do know that it is very challenging to come up with a good procurement practice. At the same time, we know that many Europe-based pharmaceutical companies are regularly revisiting whether the production should be brought back to, the API production should actually be brought back to Europe. But unfortunately, right now, it's still a matter of price. It would be way too expensive to start manufacturing in Europe. But then we enter another discussion that's the strategic approach. And we noticed that in particular for the production of antibiotics, there are voices that production should be brought back to Europe out of strategic reasons. But this is all in the air, nothing is fixed yet.
We have this also in our approach as one of the actions, although it's quite difficult because all the member states have different approaches to this. Some are quite advanced, others don't really like this idea, so we're in discussion actually. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Hi, thank you very much. My name is John Stanek. I'm working for the NGO Healthcare Home Europe, which seeks to make the healthcare sector more sustainable worldwide. And in Brussels, we're working on different work programs, and one of them is on pharmaceuticals in the environment. My question is for the representative from DG Santé, from Marilena. Pay attention, that's great. So we mentioned before that the issue of pharmaceuticals in the environment is also taking place at the manufacturing stage. So especially in the case of antibiotics, China currently produces 70 to 90% of antibiotic active pharmaceutical ingredients, and then they're mostly exported to India, where they put in final dose products. And both India and China are famous for being the center of huge environmental pollution scandals. And definitely there's a role for Europe to play there, because even if the pharmaceuticals are not produced in Europe, that's the pharmaceuticals that are marketed here. So there are two issues I wanted to raise and have your views on. The first thing is on the lack of transparency. So for the time being, there is no transparency between the link between the the company that markets the drug in Europe and the supplier that produces the active pharmaceutical ingredients. So it's very difficult for civil society organizations like ours to basically pinpoint the pharmaceutical companies that have the problem, because we cannot make the link between the company that markets the products and the suppliers. So what can the European Commission do to increase the transparency across the supply chain? The second question is linked to what MEP Paulus said before, related to the introduction of AMTAL criteria in the GMP framework, which is something the civil society has called on as well, which might be supported in the European Parliament resolution on Thursday. I wanted to see whether the Commission views has evolved on this, also linked to the zero pollution ambition that is part of the European Green Deal. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. So indeed, I mean, the approach looks overall to the whole life cycle of pharmaceuticals and the production. I mean, we have it mentioned under one of the sections, like to increase our methods in obtaining greener pharmaceuticals. So we are working on that with partners that are, I mean, we raised it in the international dialogue, in our international relations dialogue with our counterparts in China. So we raised this in end of last year, so as a follow-up of the adoption of this communication. We are on a constant dialogue on that matter. So we will see this now further, how this can evolve. In terms of the GMP criteria, then we will need, I mean, we are looking into this matter, how we can evaluate this further. The EMA, as you know, are also working on this. They have working parties, and with the inspections group, and also on our side, we are looking with working with my colleagues that work on the GMP aspects and the quality of pharmaceuticals and the manufacturing. We are further evaluating to see how we can make this indeed further on, but I don't have like a clear answer right now. So we are working on how to implement this further. But the aims are set in our approach, our strategic approach, and we are working on accomplishing those. In terms of the lack of transparency, now, yes, there is this. I understood when we met with different stakeholders, these globalized manufacturing processes with different stakeholders that participate in the manufacturing. And I understand your point in saying that it's not so transparent. And we are trying to put now further all this information, indeed, we are just at this moment working on the approaches to follow. So we will come back to you on those elements in our further implementation.
I have a small thing to add to that. Just that within my other capacity of researching illegal medicines and falsified medicines, we did a tremendous amount of work on traceability of APIs in order to connect the API to the manufacturer it actually was manufactured. But this was in the period 2011-2013, and it was absolutely impossible because there's so many steps in the trade between. It is actually between the synthesis and it's being put in a final formulation that everybody can release a batch again and again and again, and they can split it, they can merge it, and they can do everything with it. And there is traceability, but you can only trace back one step at a time. And that's what we, at the time of the falsified medicines, or even before the Falsified Medicines Directive, try to achieve, that we would have some sort of an idea where has this been manufactured, in which factory in China, But the effort was way too big to actually pursue that, so we left it there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jawad. So I'm from England and the Walgreens and Boots Alliance. So it's fantastic to see the work that you are doing regarding reducing pharmaceutical waste in the environment. But so the focus here is on pharmaceutical companies, but it's important that the healthcare professionals do get involved. So I was wondering, this is just a general open question, how do you think community pharmacies can lead change in reducing pharmaceuticals? Like, what can we be doing?
All right. We've been engaging community pharmacists for a couple of years now. There is not the room of opportunity that the people from the environmental domain were actually seeking. It's not that easy to substitute medicines for other medicines because it's very easy to create a different problem. It's not easy to change antidepressants for an extra set of cognitive treatments. You might do that, but we're researching that. Right now, the focus lies on responsible use, prudent use, getting back unused medicines and getting them to the incinerator in a safe way or reissue them. We guess that about 20% of the medicines that are prescribed are not used, and that's considerable amount. So that's where it comes in. But right now, we need awareness amongst the pharmacists and the doctors that they have a story to tell to the public. In the Netherlands, we have a very low medicines use, but I'm aware that some countries you don't leave the doctor's office empty-handed. So maybe there is some opportunity. But if you have your own ideas, and that's, I think, the wonderful opportunity we have now. You're starting your life, your careers. If you see opportunities, well, jump on them.
Yeah, so indeed also from my side, indeed prudent use would be one of the key elements for this. And in implementing the approach where actually one of the actions is indeed increasing awareness on the prudent use of pharmaceuticals, we have put together a group of experts. So 10 member states are working closer on this, and they will come up with recommendations together with EMA on how at their level to share best practices, and then further come up with further guidance or recommendations from their side how this could be implemented in concrete terms. So now this work of the working group has started, and there are like various countries like the Netherlands, Sweden, France, Spain, and others. I mean that they are working together with their expertise and best practices.
I'd like to add one thing that I left out. I think one of the jobs that we have, and which also the Commission has set out, is risk prioritization. What medicine should we be focusing on? My neighbor MEP mentioned high volume, but it's not just high volume. Metformin is by far the most, well, that's not entirely true. Macrolide has the most volume, but that's plastic, so that's not really an API in my mind. But metformin is an API that's 100% excreted and changed. Does it any harm? Well, it It's not really clear, but it has a huge volume, but something which is way more potent and has less volume, maybe even more harmful. And then again, if you judge how harmful is it? How harmful is it to what species? Is it harmful to an algae, Daphnia, fish? And those are all difficult questions, but the European Commission has reissued a research program devoted to sorting out just that, this prioritization. I mean, if you can have some sort of priority, then you enable a doctor in saying, well, in this case I choose this medicine over that medicine, and then that becomes a rational choice. Right now it's there's not a really rational choice.
Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Reese. I represent British pharmaceutical students and I work for GSK this year. A big thing that I've discussed previously with the EPSA team and with my home association is the UN Global Goals for Sustainable Development. I think they're essential and they go beyond just what we do in healthcare, but have priorities for gender equality, responsible production and consumption, clean water, clean air, economic improvements. And from hearing the conversation today, I think that healthcare needs to look beyond ourselves and into other sectors of society to see where we can work together in collaboration to address not only the issues we have here, but wider contextual issues. So I think what are the opportunities for us as students bound by one profession to look beyond ourselves and begin to build bridges with other industries to work more effectively on issues such as this. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Anyone else would like to engage? I believe the speakers will also stay here longer, so we might also ask them later on if you wish so. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Nida. I'm a second-year pharmacy student from Lithuania, and I would like to ask 2 questions at once. So, firstly, I really wanted to know, you were talking about how is it possible to reduce how much pharmaceutics get into water, soil, and how much it becomes a waste, right? I wanted to know, is there anything, can you do anything once it gets there? Like, is it possible to filter the water or to put some substances that break down those chemicals? Or like, how is it technically possible to tackle the damage that has already been done? And the second question would be, I would like to start with comparisons. So like countries, developing countries of the world, they are excusing themselves from reducing, for example, CO2 emissions because they say, well, we care about expanding our industry, about improving our economical situation for now, then we can care about environment. So like in Europe, it's the same. Like we probably are more stable to care about such things as pharmaceutics and the environment. But how can we regulate or how can we negotiate with countries like China and India that are producing a lot of this waste, but we cannot directly impact them, like, or we cannot pose sanctions on them if they don't comply our suggestions or something. So what do we do with those countries? Thank you.
I will say something to the first question. When it's actually in the environment, it's very, very difficult to do anything. What we're, of course, now also, it's also one action is to look at the waste stream itself. So to look at the wastewater, because in the wastewater treatment plant there are technologies which are, of course, very expensive and highly debatable if this is the right way to go, but there is a way we can treat it when it's in the wastewater treatment plant. But of course, if it's in manure, for instance, and it's not treated, then it's very hard to, once it's in the environment, it's not that I know that you actually can really do something.
Well, we produce a lot of drinking water from surface water, and we get rid of the medicines residues as good as possible. But given our state of technology, our equipment gets so sensitive now that we can measure every last molecule, so we still find it. So completely gone, it's never completely gone, but most of it is there until it eventually decays, if it does at all.
And from my side, so it's valid. There are valid questions, and I think that innovation could play a significant role in those. Like I read recently that antibiotics that are for the first time produced only with artificial intelligence. It's the most powerful antibiotic that has been produced like recently for the first time only with artificial intelligence. So researchers are working on developing like new technologies, and I think you as a new generation, you should look towards that direction and how we can improve as well further on through scientific means also this kind of developments. In terms of environmental monitoring, I cannot say much, but I did work for around 8 years in REACH, and I know that indeed having further information may be important. And we have actually some knowledge gaps that we have identified in our approach, and our researchers that are from the European Commission, so it's not only my colleague from DG Environment and myself working on this, but also other colleagues that are in the research and development area, that they plan to have something in the research projects and to further identify those knowledge gaps. In terms now of, you mentioned the international negotiations, and it is true that identifying those elements in negotiating with third countries, it is indeed a challenge for us. And we do our best in order to let's say, find solutions that would promote our dialogue and expand our values also to them. So that's why we have put it on the agenda with our counterparts in China and India, and also all the regulators. There is a network, IPRP, where all international partners from different countries are there. So I have put that on the agenda, and they have been informed, and steps are taken in order to ensure that our values that we have in the approach are also on their table. So we are looking as well from their side now to see where they stand and how we can work together in identifying like common grounds and work together on those.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would actually like to address on this. I have to say that like APSA, European pharmaceutical students do agree with digitalization of healthcare as being one of the steps forward for sustainability. And so, however, like in the curricula, there's literally nothing on it across Europe. We have assessed it. There's results. There's clear numbers. It is really low implemented. And you would think that other actions from the European Commission that were done in order to digitalize our society, like for example, Falsified Medicines Directive, that will help, for instance, into bringing more e-health and digital skills to curricula. It actually didn't. It only because it only actually brings it in the training. So in the last semester, for instance, when the pharmacists go to community pharmacies. So I think, although we do some steps towards digitalization, there is still quite plenty that we have to and we need to do in the curricula if we want to improve in all the areas. Thanks.
Well, if I can say from my experience, I mean, as I worked, I was in your situation some years ago, and I was as well in this kind of forum when I was in our European Law Students Association, and I know what you mean. Now what I'm trying to work from the Commission side is to bridge with actually experts that are in the member states and how to improve this curricula. And actually in this working group that we have, because the training is carried out and it is in the competence of the member states. And actually what we will see together with the experts, which is a long-term, I think, planning, for them then to see how this can be further improved. But it is on the table, and I have highlighted to them, and they are working on it. And then it will come next with concrete actions in the next period. So.
Yes, I would like to thank the first panel and for the lovely panel discussion as well. A small round of applause, please, maybe. Yes, now I would like to welcome the second panel. Firstly, I would like to introduce Christine de Pape from the European Association of Faculties of Pharmacists, the AFP. Please, round of applause. The second person is adjunct professor, title of docent, Tiina Sikanen from University of Helsinki. The next person is Fredrik Borström from the Swedish Pharmaceutical Association. And the last but not least is Luis Patayu from ASGP and Joint Task Force from pharmaceutical industry. Thank you all for coming. Quite some of you flew from far away and made the effort and are flying back the same day. So yes, once again, thank you for this. Yes, I think we can already start. Miss Christine.
Yeah, can I have a handheld mic?
Please, microphone to be delivered here.
Yeah, thank you. It's not a problem of my voice, but if I sit down, the students don't see me, so I stand up. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm a local. I'm from the Free University of Brussels, so the Flemish-speaking one, so nearby. And I'm a teacher in pharmaceutical, the compounding forms, the compounding dosage forms, and pharmaceutical technology. But I'm here as a representative of EAFP, so the Association of the Faculties of Pharmacy in Europe. But being a teacher, being a professor in pharmaceutical technology, and I hope you all agree that pharmaceutical dosage forms may be not that huge anymore in other Europe countries, but it still is in Belgium, that dosage forms, by definition, are really dealing with the issue we are speaking about this afternoon, that dealing with pharmaceuticals in the environment, that pharmaceutical compounded forms and dosage forms, that you can avoid extra waste. Your prescribers, why would you need 100 grams of a cream or an ointment if 30 grams is enough? The same for capsules. A prescriber can really make the prescriptions that's needed by the patient, so avoid waste. That's also something we can tackle. I think we have a great panel this afternoon. I read the abstracts just before I came here. So I think we have a great panel in the sense of that you all tackle one of the issues of the subject of this afternoon. So I have the luxury just to tell you more about the position of AIFP, so the perspectives, that's what I called it. The perspectives we think that are important in the involvement of the pharmacy curricula. So you may agree or not of what we have heard before this afternoon, that yes, curricula, yes, pharmaceuticals in the environment are important in the curricula, but is it enough what we teach? Is it enough what we share with our students, our graduates? Are they really have all the knowledge about the subject? It probably will no, and it will probably never be enough. As you know, it's always difficult when you revise a pharmacy curriculum. It's very difficult in a 5 years curriculum to get everything you want to teach, to get it in there. But we try to do our best. So that brings me to what we call the 4 pillars for relevant pharmacy education. And we think that it's in there. One of the pillars dealing with awareness, preparedness by our graduates, that what you need to know about pharmaceuticals in the environment, that it's tackled in education and in training. So this is the position paper I'm referring to. So yes, it's a guide, it's no law, it's a guide. To the development, updating, evaluation of pharmacy programs across Europe. So we recognize, and we all do, hopefully, that pharmacy is a profession in collaboration with the other healthcare providers. So yes, it's not, our patient is in the center, patient-oriented focus. And it has been said before, yes, we need to take care about good advice, good communication, avoiding false information, also those urban stories around fake news, also dealing with environment. So we have to take care of that as well. But indeed, as I said before, with the prescribers, it can be a reason, or a way to avoid waste of unused medication. So the 4 pillars I was talking about, that's what we are pushing in that position paper. Science-practice balance, in the sense of, yes, the importance of pharmaceuticals in the environment, it needs to be in the education, it needs to be in the program. But I think Tina is going to tackle that, and I'm really looking forward how they do that throughout their whole curriculum. But it should be science-based, that our graduates really have the knowledge what they advise to patients and to other healthcare awards. The teaching methods, the team players and preparedness, I said that already before, it will be in another slide. We did that not by ourselves, not EIFP on its own, so together with the other stakeholders and everything under the presidency of Professor Azzopardi, Lilian Azzopardi of Malta. This is the scope, this is what you would read if you look at our position paper at the website. The 4 pillars mentioned in full, what we mean by those pillars, but I think this is more interesting for this afternoon. So what I said, yes, our graduates needs to be informed about everything that deals with pharmaceuticals in the environment, but it should be a scientific approach, and the knowledge, the skills, they know what they're talking about. So we need to engage our students in everything they do during their studies, but also once they graduated, that they have the awareness for green measures. Team players, of course, that's what I said before. A pharmacist is in collaboration with other healthcare takers, so that it's really act as a professional. And then the preparedness and relevance within the curricula. So be aware of all those relevant issues about pharmaceutical in the environmental, and indeed the sustainability and the preparedness by graduates to support those green measures. So to conclude, EAFP encourage that revision of pharmacy curricula, so that we will count on the matter that other schools of pharmacy implement those 4 pillars, and especially, as we're discussing this afternoon, with respect to pharmaceuticals in the environment. I think that's my last slide, so I'm looking forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Val. Now I would like to introduce Professor Tina Sikanen to present her presentation.
Is this on? Yes. Yeah, I'd also like to stand, if you may. I guess we are used to standing in front of the classroom. So so hey, my name is Tina Sikanen. I'm actually I'm not a teacher per se, but I'm a researcher at the Faculty of Pharmacy, University of Helsinki. And I'm leading a research group and studying drug metabolism in human, but also nowadays also in fish. But I have the honor to represent our teachers and to try and give you an idea of how we have been incorporating environmental concerns and also environmentally friendly solutions into the curricula, pharmacy curricula at the University of Helsinki. So I try to give you some idea of our experiences and perhaps the lessons learned, what we've learned in Finland and at the University of Helsinki. So so more precisely, I actually represent a task force called Generation Green, which was launched in 2015 and inspired by the Green Pharmacy Practice Report, which was released by the International Pharmaceutical Federation in the same year. And the Generation Green Task Force, there's a link to our website also if you want to visit that. But the Generation Green Task Force, it is pretty much a national implementation of all these position papers that we just heard about. Also national implementation of the Green Pharmacy Practice, the best that we can do in these respects. But at the University of Helsinki, we've already discussed how overwhelming this challenge related to pharmaceuticals in the environment is. So we also, we face the same big challenge at the University of Helsinki. I thought, how can we tackle this challenge? What could we do? And how can we make sure that it is somehow efficiently resolved? And we thought that from the past, we had learned that if we actually do want to ensure that a change will happen eventually, we need to do it in some sort of a theoretical framework. And we chose to use this approach also when implementing environmental concerns into the curricula. So we pretty much followed the 8 steps of success, hopefully, that have been presented by John Cotter in 1995, just to show you that it's not the most important message today, but there are these 8 steps, and I will briefly go through our curricular reform with the help of these steps. So the first step is, and the most important thing is, of course, to create a matter of urgency, the feeling of the urgency. And as we've already heard, and as we all know, the environmental signature pharmaceutical that really accumulates from multiple different emission sources, of course, to human emissions due to human use are definitely by far the most important. But the big question in this respect is that who's responsible for reducing the environmental impact? That we've also learned that it's hard to say. But when we started to talk about these issues at our faculty, we also mapped the students' attitudes, and surprisingly, the students too, they thought that, okay, it has to be the drug developers and the drug pharmaceutical industry. By far, most of the students consider it in this way, although many recognize that also pharmacists, physicians, and patients themselves maybe might be responsible, depending on what is the emission source in question. And this is pretty much the message that we effectively wanted to distribute. The fact that we all are responsible for solving the problem. It cannot be outsourced to any other party like environmental scientists. Then the second step is to form, if we want to manage to change in a proper manner, we need to have a guiding coalition, a strong coalition that somehow leads the way. And this is what we did also in 2015. We formed a guiding coalition, so to say, and we were fortunate that our deans and the lead of the faculty, they were also convinced that they have to be involved in this. And we had a lot of professors, also administrative support, and many faculty teachers and researchers also involved in the guiding coalition. But not only teachers and faculty representatives, most importantly, we also had students, both undergraduates and PhD students, and one of our then students is now acting pharmacist, also present here, Sophie. So, and still participating we have a monthly meetings, and all of these different people from different levels actively participate in these actions. In addition to that, we have a lot of have had a lot of national mentors and collaborators, for example, from the Finnish Environment Institute. Then the third step, obviously, is to clearly define what is the vision of change. And for us, it was clearly education-oriented, so we wanted to improve the fact that we will have a future generation that has somehow inherent environmental consciousness. And this was the main message that we wanted to share, and our three main steps how to achieve that. Focused on curricular reform, but not only that, but in addition to curricular reform, we also wanted to support generation of new science-based knowledge in pharmaceutical research, as well as social interaction, discussion on these important issues what we've already discussed today, like what could be a fair way to incorporate environmental concerns in pharmaceuticals pricing, reimbursement, public procurements, and so on. Then the third step, what we followed was to start communicating the vision. In this respect too, we also asked the students, what do you want? What do they want? And it was very clear from the student answers that it was considered that environmental aspects, they need to be somehow integrated into the domain-specific studies. So this is what we've been doing now. We've been trying to integrate as much as possible environmental aspects and issues into our regular teaching, so to say, regular courses. Although we also want to often emphasize them with a green leaf that is representing the Generation Green philosophy. And then in addition to integrated courses, integrated course contents, we also have arranged some special seminars and have brought these topics into the thesis works, master's and bachelor theses, PhD theses. And also, we've actively participated in planning the extramural training in Finland, together with, for example, Finnish Medicines Agency and the Pharmaceutical Information Center in Finland. Well then, if we move on, the fifth step in the change management model is to empower the action, and this is pretty important, of course, for us, and especially personally, I've been most active in this area. So we've made a lot of efforts in order to attract research funding so that we can generate more and more science-based knowledge to support evidence-based decision making. And currently we have a huge national strategic research project up and running. It's called SUDEN. The abbreviation comes from the long project name. And in this project we actually do not only work with pharmacists or environmental scientists, but we have pretty outrageous or brave collaborations, for example, with people from hydrometallurgy, who are trying to currently, just as an example, currently trying to consider whether it would be meaningful to recycle the aluminum in blister packaging. Kind of completely just a random problem, but just to give you an idea how wide the field is. Well, there are so many different issues that we could and should consider. And also in this project, we obviously have a lot of stakeholders, national and also some foreign stakeholders involved to lead and guide the discussions. And then, how has it been successful? Creating quick wins is the sixth step of the change management model, and we've been happy to observe that already in 2 years, our students actually they had the students' awareness had increased substantially. Many of them consider that actually we do discuss a lot of environmental issues in teaching nowadays, or in 2017 compared with 2 years before that. And I've also listed some examples of what kind of student-driven activities we currently have at the faculty. For example, our students spontaneously and unsupervised arrange their own journal clubs and team meetings around green pharmacy topics. The most recent activity is a fundraising program, which aims at funding a new professorship in green pharmacy or sustainable pharmacy area, and so on. So this is pretty important that the students have actually, they have activated in a really significantly short time. But then again, that's, I mean, the students, the new generation is definitely kind of well aware of all this, but we have lots of barriers, and I'm a little bit sorry to say that I do represent this, one of the major barriers. So teachers, what we face is that our teachers are actually not so ready to adopt to new models or the change in the mindset. But little by little, we also monitor the students' attitudes in the same way what we did with the students, and asked how relevant they consider the sustainable pharmacy is in teaching. So there is not that much progress yet, or there wasn't that much progress in 2 years. But like I said, little by little, we hope that we can also change the mindset of our current pharmacy profession and the teachers at the faculty. And this is what we consider is what we consider most critical to achieving this is definitely the fact that there is increasing demand for environmental knowledge among the students. And also what we consider important in changing the mindset of teachers is to somehow institutionalize the change. And this we've started little by little by cooperating with other educational programs, especially with medical sciences and veterinary sciences, as well as in sustainability sciences together with our Sustainability Science Institute. And then also there is a lot of Nordic collaboration in teaching of pharmaceutical sciences through, for example, a university hub called Nordic POP, Patient-Oriented Products. And the environmental concern is heavily also incorporated in there, or the concerns are incorporating in that hub. I will leave it here. The 8th step, I won't say that we are already on the 8th level or at this level, but obviously to make it stick, we need to have not only national activities, but we need to have Europe-wide and nationwide cooperation. And for that, I really like to thank EPSA for arranging this event and kind of raising awareness. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kiitos. In regards to the 8 stages, I think we also can assess it, compare it to today's event. So there was an urgency. We formed a coalition, and we're focused now on getting a clear idea of where we go. So yeah, it's good to see this as well. I would like to welcome our next speaker, Fredrik Borström from Swedish Pharmaceutical Association.
Yeah, thank you. We are the standing panel today, I think. I also like to stand. You sit quite lower in front of me. I had the question earlier, what can you do as a community pharmacist then? And this is one answer from Sweden, what we can do. But first, some basics. Drugs have an environmental impact along the entire life cycle, from manufacturing until it is thrown away, and hopefully in a proper way then. I will be starting from the back, when it's in the disposal bins, of what we have mentioned already, collection of non-used medicines, and walk it upstreams and talk about optimized sales usage, and at the end up how we as community pharmacists can make a sustainable production happen. So, collection of non-used medicine. 1,400 tons were collected by Swedish community pharmacists in 2018. And is that much? Well, we have 1,500 pharmacies, so about a ton a pharmacy a year is collected by the Swedish pharmacists. This waste that was collected is handled by special waste facilities, so it's not thrown away. And all Swedish community pharmacies are obliged to collect this from the public. And then we have all the waste from the hospitals as well. It's not included in this 1,400 tons of medicines. But is this much? Well, the best thing is that these 1,400 tons had not been dispensed at all, because they are not making any use in the waste bins. So then we move up a step and talk about optimized usage. In the community pharmacies in Sweden, we inform about environmental risks. There are in our product information on some products, not all, information about what happens when the substance gets out in the environment. We try to reduce overuse and unnecessary use, and if possible, we try to dispense in smaller packages. It's not always that easy, because smaller packages can in fact be more expensive than the large ones. So it's not that easy to do, and the patients, they really want to have the large pack. They don't want to go to the pharmacies as often as they have to do if they get the small package. One example that we have done for the entire pharmacy market in Sweden is that for the substance diclofenac, we know that it is harmful for the environment, for water living creature, and most treatment plants can't purify that active substance. It is an OTC drug, in a short time just as a gel, and it has been in oral forms as well, but that is about to change, I think, in every European country. All members of the Pharmacy Association agreed to inform, next to all OTC products, on the shelf label that products with diclofenac has a risk for the environment and to use it thoughtfully. So this was information that you can find on every pharmacy in Sweden next to the product. But then to the big question, how to get an impact on the production if you are a community pharmacist. it's not easy. We have talked about it earlier. There are a lack of transparency. We don't know. We can't choose. The reimbursement authorities that makes decisions what price it should be, which generics should be sold this month. We can't tell the customers that, well, this is the cheapest, but this one is actually produced better. We don't have that information, so the customers can't make the choice, the prescribers can't make the choice, and we can't make the choice. But for OTC products, there are larger possibilities, and there's where we get next. We have in place already one of the larger pharmacy chains in Sweden, Apotek Hjärtat, the heart pharmacy. They launched a marking of products that they call Välj med hjärtat, or choose with the heart, for products. Then they realized, even if they are a large pharmacy chain, they don't cover the entire market. It's better if the entire market has the same guidelines. So we in the Swedish Pharmacy Association are now about to take over that marking, that guidance. We are not calling it Choose by the Heart because that's the pharmacy chain's name. We are calling it Välj hållbart, or Choose Sustainability. We are launching this now in May. So then all Swedish pharmacy will put this green mark. It's a couple of V's in a circle next to products that have this, that fulfills the criteria to have this marking. In the future, we hope for that a third party will take over this marking, and that's, you see, Bra Miljöval and the Swan marking. That's common Swedish markings for products in the the shops today. So we hope that that will be the next step, or even better, if it would be an European guidance that is the same for all countries. And that's the step on the way to get a sustainable production of pharmaceuticals, both for OTC products and for prescribed products in the future. So, what do you have to do when you are a manufacturer and want to have this marking on your products or next to the product? We can't put it on the boxes, of course. You have to have a sustainability report according to the GRI standard, and it would have to be reviewed by the third party. The manufacturer must also have a full membership of an organization called Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative. And if a manufacturer has this too, all OTC products can have this guidance marking, except if there are products that have specific pollutants. And for example, we have diclofenac. So you can't have the marking Choose Sustainability if you have a product containing diclofenac. And this is the first step. We are in the future planning to increase the demands on the manufacturers step by step, but we have to start somewhere. And this is have the bar on an acceptable level for everyone right now. And my last slide just had to show some examples how it will look like in the Swedish pharmacies in May. Not all of these products are OTC products, so it's just examples. And it will be visible both on physical pharmacies, brick and mortar pharmacies, and on internet pharmacies, which are quite big in Sweden. So yeah, that was the Swedish initiative to make a sustainable production of pharmaceuticals.
Thank you very much, Tak. So now our last speaker is Luis, also EPSA alumnus, and yeah, he will present the approaches and actions taken by the pharmaceutical industry.
Thank you. I would like to thank our MEPs today for hosting this event, and also to the pharmaceutical students who are here. I will thank in the name of the President, Mihai, and also a big thank you to Tilen for organizing it with the time and geographical constrictions that you had today. I decided to do this presentation in a more positive way. We are used to pointing the finger, we are used to blame and shame, but we are very seldom looking for solutions. The pharmaceutical industry has had their slice of the pie already going for quite a while. This is not very well known, and this is why I decided to do this presentation for you today. I was, before I was working for the European Association for Self-Care Industry, I was in Parliament. I was an assistant for an MEP who was in ENVI committee. He was also from an environmentalist party. Some of you might think, but that's a bit conflicting. Well, let's take it forward. These are the three big umbrella representatives of industry in Europe. And these have joined forces back in the day to address the problem of pharmaceuticals in the environment. We know this is a problem. We're not trying to hide it. This is not a Dieselgate. It's there, and it's as harmful for people as it is for us as an industry. And that's why, quite long ago, we've launched a project called the Eco-Pharmaco Stewardship. And this project had a few pillars, but one of the first things is that it has to address the real problem. The real problem in Europe is about usage. You will see there, if I can point it right, usage and excretion and disposal are major here. Of course, there's a big problem also on veterinary, but this is probably for the veterinary industry to take care of. This is where we can tackle. And we decided to divide this eco-pharmaco stewardship into three pillars. One, to encourage the research. The second, to manage the effluents from our factories. And also to have a life cycle assessment of the environmental risk. What exactly is there? What are we going to find there? Addressing the first one, we had a few IMI. You know IMI? IMI is the Innovative Medicines Initiative. So industry and European Union are putting money together into this program. And it has several projects. I'll talk to you about three of them which tackle pharmaceuticals in the environment. This is the oldest one. It's called Chem21. Chem21 is actually the first project about greening manufacturing, how to find greener drugs. Of course, I don't like the word green in the sense that what is green today might not be green tomorrow, but we're used to this term in order to make it less harmful for the environment. But we have become very good at finding traces of medicines. Our technology has evolved. Our people have also concentrated more in cities, but unfortunately our wastewater treatment plants have not grown in the same way as people concentration in cities. We're also living longer, which means that we're also taking more medicines. Which brings us to the next project, which is called the Intelligence-Led Assessment for Pharmaceuticals in the Environment. We have too many pharmaceuticals with very little information on them. I will talk about it later, but only from 2006 onwards did we have an environmental risk assessment, which was very well put by our colleague and MEP, Jutta Paulus. As you can see, all of these are investing. I will bring you forward before. So 26 million, 10 million euros already on this one, and we have produced data on pharmaceuticals in the environment, on the amounts of that they have in the environment, and we've also found out intelligent ways of finding which medicines are worrisome, which ones are a priority concern, and which are not. This project has come to a finish. It has its conclusions. I would advise you all to go to ipi.org to take a look at it. But I will call your attention to this, even though don't worry if you cannot read the small print. So these are all several molecules that were studied. I could not fit it obviously here. But you will see that the ones who have concern are very few on top. And this is the same conclusion that WHO has reached before. That the medicines that actually pose a problem to the environment, not for people. WHO also said there's no problem in drinking water. These are just traces. You would have to drink 4,400 pools, Olympic swimming pools of water for it to be one product. I will come back to this one. But you will see that these are the substances that have concern, and we should start with these. We have a new study that follows IPI, and this study is now coming. It will be for the next 6 years. It will have 15 public partners. As you saw before, they all have public partners. 10 industry partners. Some of them are also SMEs, so this is not just for multinationals. And we also have 9 European member states who are actively engaging in this project. And this project will take up both of the previous concerns. One on greener pharmaceuticals, on green drug design, and the other one also on the effect models that we can take. So we can actually do in vitro models, we can do in silico models. Unfortunately, we will still have to do some in vivo models. But of course, more testing means more animal testing eventually. So the more we can avoid animal testing, the better. There will be obviously iterative assessment and also experimental testing. I will just move forward, but I will be there for the debate. Welcome to answer your questions. So on the second pillar, we have already mentioned by our colleague from the Swedish pharmacies, the PSCI, the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative. And the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Initiative, as well as the AMR Industry Alliance, has a big chunk on environmental sustainability and efficiency resources. And these actually are a consortia of pharmaceutical industries who are teaching themselves how to do it, who are teaching how to evaluate the predicted environmental concentrations, how to evaluate the predicted non-effect concentrations of these products into the environment. The AMR Industry Alliance actually has these 4 pillars. One on research, more research, another one on access, another one on appropriate use, and another one on manufacturing and environment. Of course, we agree in a lot of these because throughout the supply chain we need to have efficiency and efficacy, and we want users to be safe and trusting their medicines. So we want them to take antibiotics when they need it, not when they don't need it, because that works against industry. We don't have a huge pipeline on antibiotics, and we know that this will be a problem that we will have to address in the years to come. And so I will welcome you to read the progress report, and I will call your attention to this table here. It doesn't matter what is written there in detail, but it's the AMR Alliance science-based predicted no-effect concentration for risk assessment. And this is also being now taken up, finally, by the Indian government. The Indian government is debating this exact same table that's been there for the AMR. And of course, will they enforce it? That's another question. Or how will they enforce it? That's another question. I will welcome Jean-Yves to answer your question on that one. On the last pillar, because I'm short on time, I will also mention meds disposal. Most of you know it. EPSA is also co-signatory of meds disposal. And this is one of the extended producer responsibilities of industry throughout Europe. On a national basis, they have entered different consortia with pharmacists and with wholesalers in order to make take-back schemes that will bring back medicines, unused medicines, and expired medicines back to be properly dealt with. This is the Spanish case where they even do some recycling in the middle of the process. This is the Ciclamed, the French one. This is the Valormed, the Portuguese one. And this is the Sigmed, the Spanish one. But there are several others. It doesn't mean that all countries need a take-back scheme. But we need to know when we move or when we go abroad or when we are in different places how to dispose of it. And that's where meds disposal comes in. We would like very much to have this a bit more coverage throughout Europe for this because it's one of the ways that we can take or that we can tackle these medicines so that they don't end up in landfill, that they don't end up in the sink. Unfortunately, a lot of people still do it. The last one that I would like to talk to you about is extended environmental risk assessment. So the environmental risk assessment has been there for 2006. Now you need to present it to EMA in order to have a marketing authorization. And this will evaluate the predicted environmental concentrations that need to be under the predicted no-effect concentrations. And these PNECs are tested in 3 live models that mimic the most sensitive animals in the environment. It's a question of exposure, it's a question of toxicology, but it's also a question of risk, because not all substances present the same risk, and it's also a question of use. We probably use much more ibuprofen than we use methotrexate. But this means that in the environment, how are we going to evaluate it? It also means that we need to evaluate how these drugs actually bioaccumulate. What's their partition between oil and water? What is their mobility in the environment? So industry has long said we need this to move forward in an extended ERA. And what is the extended ERA? The extended ERA will measure the total PEC, so not just for one market authorization holder, but for all the producers of diclofenac. So instead of me presenting just ERA for my diclofenac, I would actually have to integrate the whole total exposure on the environment of all diclofenac in the environment. Also, foster more real-life research. What are we getting there on the environment? Targeted sampling, which means hotspots. We know we have hotspots. Wastewater treatment plants are hotspots. Hospitals are hotspots. Manufacturing plants are hotspots. We could have hotspots all over. They cost money. So we need to know where to prioritize also. How to apply mitigating measures. There are very few mitigating measures yet in place. We need to be more creative. For instance, in the Netherlands, we have contrasts that are used for imagiology, and they are collected after use, which means that you will have to take your urine somewhere else. It's not going down the drain. What else can we do? And we also need to address a lot of legacy APIs that we have, even though it's 10% of the average concern. These legacy APIs that have been there for a while and are there before 2006 also need to present their environmental risk assessments. This is the extended risk assessment. So some take-home messages, and because the remit was also to talk about what can health professionals do or future health professionals do, I would say for sure support disposal schemes and information to patients. On the other side, those of you who go into industry, perhaps we need some of you to address these data gaps. Contact or work together with your environmental engineers to address these. We need also to ensure that patient access is still there, so that we don't have delays on new medicines that reach the market, but we also have people who are not holding back from taking a medicine when they need it. We need also proportionate application of environmental policy instruments. We've talked about a few here today. We've talked about precautionary principle, we've talked about GMPs, we have not talked about benefit risk, but these usually come up. The problem is that even though we don't want to hinder patient access, most of these will apply barriers that will at least delay the process. And I wonder if we are having the right professionals in place, if someone who's evaluating benefit risk is actually the right person to evaluate environmental concerns. If someone who's used to do inspections on industry plants for GMPs would actually be the right person to evaluate environmental risk assessment, the environmental effluence of a plant. And we also want consumer trust. And this is where you as community pharmacists will also have a saying. Make sure that your patient is knowledgeable of what he's taking. Make sure that he's taking the right medicine responsibly, which means at the right time, for the right reason. And this is something that you can do. I thank you all for your attention, and I hope that you have several questions for me later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Obrigado. Yes, I would like to open the floor for discussion and questions.
Hello, my name is Maeva and I'm a pharmacy student from France. First, I would like to thank you all for this panel for this presentation and for being here and engaging with us. I will have several questions, but quite connected. The first one will be, as you mentioned, for example, Helsinki, you mentioned, for example, that deans and professors were not all ready for those changes. So I was wondering how could we approach them? Do you have any advices for us on how we could be the one to also go to them and try to implement this change together in our faculties and universities? And the second question will be more on the practice side. Do you think that in regards to pharmacists that are already working and now facing this pharmaceutical environment challenge, are they prepared enough to tackle it? And if not, how can they get more ready to work towards these challenges and issues? Thank you.
Maybe I can start regarding the, you probably referred to the guiding coalition that I mentioned, that we, well, first of all, we were fortunate that we have really wise deans, I mean, and smart persons in the leading positions, I would say. But I think, I mean, maybe the solution to everything is that there needs to be some sort of science evidence base. And then I also have to admit that it requires a lot of, you need to pursue, and you need to be active in many times. So I'm sorry, I don't have any.
I don't think there is a miracle answer to that, but what we often experience when faculties are dealing with curricula changes is what we call the comfort zone of teachers. And it's sometimes so difficult to encourage them to try something. And of course, if they have the feeling that they are lacking experience or even knowledge about a certain subject, that's why we have interdisciplinary teaching, that they look for a collaboration with other teachers or other experts out of the faculty. And that can be a way forward, of course, but we know we also have, we are dealing with that comfort zone, and to get teachers out of it and to encourage them to change their way of teaching.
I have only experience from Sweden, and I will say that most of pharmacy staff in Sweden are quite aware of environmental issues. Perhaps that's one thing, is that they see all these 1,400 tons that are handed over to the pharmacists during the years, and they see these huge amounts that are handed in, and they know what they would like to make a difference. So I don't think that's an issue in Sweden, but I don't have those numbers that you had, so I can't really know. But I think Swedish pharmacists would like to make an impact on this issue.
Any other questions?
Thank you. I thought there was someone before me. My first question is to Mr. Bostrom. I wanted to get back to what you presented on the information you provide on diclofenac and the label you presented as well. What was the situation in Sweden that made this kind of information possible? And how do you think this could be replicated in other EU countries? Because Sweden is so much at the forefront of this, but some countries from other regions, other parts of Europe are still lagging behind. So how can the best practice that is taking place in Sweden be disseminated in other regions, in other countries in Europe? My second question is to Luis. I would like to welcome, as you said, I'm really happy to have more of a positive discourse and speech about pharmaceuticals in the environment. And I do believe indeed that it's very important to engage with the industry on this. This is a major issue with a lot of stakeholders, and the pharmaceutical industry is one of them. And I'm really happy that a few initiatives have been taken place. I just would like to maybe point to one of it, which is the one you presented on the AMR Industry Alliance. And there are two questions related to that. The first one is that, of course, there are a few industrial, like pharmaceutical companies that are part of the alliance, but it's only a minority. So how can we engage with the rest of the pharmaceutical industry so they can actually engage and do step forwards in this process? The second question is also linked to transparency. The companies that are part of this alliance have set goals, which I think is great, and they committed to reach this goal, which I also think is great. But they have to come up with, like, they have to explain the advancement and do like commit to reports every 2 years to explain the steps they have taken to reach these goals. But these reports are not open to the public. They are not transparent. So how can we increase transparency in these self-industry initiatives? On the point that you said, and that's why I smile a little bit, the list of PNIC values that you presented from the Empower Industry Alliance that you said were discussed by the Indian government, it's not entirely true, because I think that the list of PNIC values that is being discussed at this stage is much stricter than the one that the Empower Industry Alliance came up with. Thank you.
Okay, starting with diclofenac then. There is a large change in even in the prescribing business in Sweden. So it's going down on diclofenac. The prescribers are prescribing it more or less. So was quite easy to take that step in the pharmacies, because we have the doctors on our side in this. The second question, how to export this to other European countries. I don't have a straight answer. You are very welcome to visit us in Sweden, and we can discuss it through. We think that we have found a good level on demands on the manufacturers right now that you can start with. You can adapt them, and they are taken forward to be possible to use even in other European countries. So I think you could, with slightly adoption, have that in your countries as well. I hope as well.
Thank you. I will first address also this question of the labeling, because I think as a consumer, when I see a labeling, I tend to trust it. The only problem is that we have such a huge data gap, and now industry has, from a competitive perspective, how do I know that we are following our competition rules when only we're pointing to one being bad or to one being good, where there's a huge data gap there? Why don't we wait until we have more data, at least let's say about 50% of the products, in order to put it on? Another thing is that we probably are misleading. Unfortunately, we don't have infinite resources, nor time, nor money to put into all the matters that we would like. Of course, this is an important matter, but we've just addressed or started to address simple substances. We're not yet at the point of testing the most common combinations in the environment. So today we have a green seal, and tomorrow we find that two of these, or a combination of these two green seals, which could be common, are actually detrimental to the environment. So I think there should be some more carefulness in order not to mislead the customers. But overall, I would say it's a good initiative. I mean, I'd like to know if I buy my coffee, it's coming from an environmental and socially protective company, let's say. So the other question about the AMR Industry Alliance, it actually only covers about 30% of the producers of antibiotics worldwide. And now I'll do a small parenthesis. Because when we speak about India and China and about their production and about Europe being a beacon of sustainability, and taking also the point of green procurement that was so well put before, which is a way that Europe can choose that their medicines are safe for the environment. But let's not fool ourselves that this will stop production in India or China because they will still have very cheap production for African countries, for South American countries, and unless we have industry alliances that can push for better practices, we as Europeans unfortunately cannot shape global legislation. We can do it through best practices, we can do it through the UN, we can do it through WHO, but these are just hinting because, like healthcare and environment, these are of the member states, in the case of Europe, but also throughout the world. This is a nation prerogative to decide upon. That's why India is probably so late in adopting this kind of list. And also the topic of transparency, not just what you said, but also taking up the question that you did before on traceability. We understand from a consumer perspective, I mean, we're all patients and consumers, but we also work for economical operators that, in case of Europe, are very successful. Transparency, when you think economically, you have to put in also business confidentiality. And part of the success of industry is about business confidentiality. Keeping prices down in Europe because they're soaring, healthcare expenses are soaring. That's why we had to move towards generics in order to crush down prices of medicines. Medicines are the main cost of healthcare, other than the workforce, of course. But it means that this production had to be shifted towards manufacturers that can bring a more competitive price. It's in China and it's in India. We have environmental concerns today. Hopefully we will have social concerns tomorrow. Will we have a traceability on all of these? Will we inspect also their social status of their workers? Because it's not up to us to decide how China and India actually legislate on those matters, but it's up to us probably to buy more carefully. The same way as I would go into a Swedish pharmacy and I know, okay, this is greener. This is sort of individual green procurement. And regarding the last one, specifically on the list of India, well, I'm glad that they took a more stringent approach, but I'm also glad that they took this one up before they moved on to a better one, because at least we know that it's going somewhere.
Thank you for asking me over here. I'm going to complicate matters a bit. Okay, so you don't have a green leaf next to the diclofenac. What is the patient going to do? Patient has an alternative, will probably take naproxen, which has a higher dose. Is not as bad to the environment, but the dose is 5 times higher, daily dose, 100 versus the 500. The dose being larger, if it's going to be a persistent use, the pharmacy will probably also sell omeprazole. So now you're not selling one, but 2 pharmaceuticals. So if you do something which appears to be relatively simple, it's in reality it is not. And knowing that naproxen is nearly approaching the risk limit, we can't afford people going from naproxen, from diclofenac to naproxen all at once, because then we have a problem with naproxen. So green labels, I think it's a fantastic idea. We considered it, but we're still in the position where we need criteria, and that's where this extended ERA comes in. It's so incredibly difficult. What to weigh and what balances with what. That's so complicated that we do not. At this point, do not wish a green label for the Netherlands, because we don't know what it stands for. But that being said, we do want a couple of OTC measures. For instance, the gel that you mentioned. Gels are horrible in the sense of that 90% of the product is washed off. You get it in your clothes, and it goes into the environment. For diclofenac, it's 96% of the applied dose that goes down the drain. So should you have gels available? Yes, of course, because people need it. But do you need it ODC? That's the big question. Should you have it behind the counter as a filter? That's an option that you have. Another matter is you have for people with COPD, you have an option for powder inhalers and aerosol inhalers. The aerosol inhaler has a hydrofluorocarbon propellant, which is immense greenhouse gas. So maybe the people that have the breathing capacity to use the powder inhaler, maybe they can use the powder inhaler until they cannot do it anymore and then switch to the aerosol inhaler. It's a small thing, but that being said, we have to be very careful that it may not be a single product that's the problem. If metoprolol is a problem and you switch to atenolol, it's the same class of product. It will do the same thing in the environment. So if one is green and the other is greener or less green, I'm getting really confused. So it's not easy. That's the bottom line. And the pricing was mentioned. I think pricing is, that's everything right now. The reimbursement systems, the insurance companies, they are really, really hard to get to the table to talk to them about how they arrive at their pricing, how they arrive at their reimbursement. And I think as a group, as far representatives of this profession, you should ask the people at the insurance companies more questions about this aspect. We're not getting very far with them right now, but I'm sure in the end we'll have to talk to them, and also about prices. Are prices the only driving force that matter? And if so, do we add the price of cleaning up the environment, cleaning up drinking water, cleaning up sewage? Are we going to add that into the balance as well? Those are the big questions, I think, for the near future.
Just want to add that these questions aren't new to us, of course. We have thought about them as well. As I mentioned, we will have to start somewhere. We think we have heard it from the industry, not to point fingers. We have to wait till we have all information. But we say, no, we start on a low level and we're going up. And we landed in diclofenac. It's a very moderate text, I would say. So it's nearly like to move it back from the shelves in comparison. So it's quite moderate. And it's complicated, but that's why medicines are sold in pharmacies.
That's right.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, it was also in Sweden that you've switched back paracetamol, and now on prescription it's actually sold more than it ever was in OTC.
It's switched back from the general sales list, so it's not allowed in tablet forms in outside pharmacies. Yes, the OTC sales increased when it was switched to only pharmacy, but that was because of a very massive marketing campaign right after the switch. So you can't really say what was what in that.
Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you. I'll actually just make Jan Freire from GSK. I'd just like to make an addition to what Luis said about the reach that you can have outside of Europe, but actually, and Luis is correct, authorities cannot have that reach, but actually industry is actively working on having that reach outside of Europe. At DEFCA, I also chair the China working group, so I'm going to give the example of China. FP has a memorandum of understanding with the Organization of the Chinese Manufacturers. And this is actually where every year we advocate to them and we have workshops to them, not only on PIE, but also on good manufacturing practices. So this is the industry actively trying to change something in other part of the world, our industry. Apart from that, and what we can see as well is that the changes that have been happening in China over the last year, with China accessing to the ICH, now being part of the management board of the ICH, is actually made that all those requirements that actually need to be a member of the ICH make sure that environmental and quality aspects are respected. And this is actually visible as well. Over the last 3 years, more than 5,000 manufacturers in China were closed due to environmental and quality issues. So actually, the industry, this is just to show by pressure of the industry, by the industry actually educating authorities in other countries, the industry can actually have a positive impact on other parts of the globe, even when governments can't. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would first really like to appreciate how our speakers really well explained different aspects of this complex problem. And I was really surprised how many concrete measures are being taken to tackle this issue. However, I see that the problem is also in general public's view towards this problem. So as it was mentioned, firstly, there is quite little data about how harmful drugs are, so we can't present very visual charts to make people care about this thing. Also, accessibility to this information about ecotoxicity is also limited, as it was said, due to perhaps various interest groups, and it doesn't make matters more clear either. And also, it was mentioned that in Finland, students care more than professors. So how little then should general public care? Clearly less than professionals like professors. So, and there are right now clearly not enough public campaigns about this issue. Oh well, everyone is talking about climate change, about that smoking is bad, about carcinogens in our food, and everyone is aware of it. But at the end, people still take a path of least resistance, and they are, well, quite ignorant towards this problem. So how do we initiate a change by incentivizing people to actually care about this? Because as it was mentioned in Sweden, people want bigger packages because they don't want to go to pharmacy often because it takes their time, it takes their effort. However, this problem, it's accumulating, it's expanding. World's population is also growing, people are getting older, and more drugs will be used in the future. So we better make the society aware of this in every way possible by presenting accurate information, not scaring people, but obviously trying to be objective, but emphasizing the importance of this problem. And how do we do that most effectively? Thank you.
I'm going to take one step back to talk to you about another substance that's very detrimental for the environment, even in lower doses, and it causes feminization in fish. You'll probably guess it, it's estrogen. Not just fake estrogens, the ones that we take to control our, has birth control pills, but also our regular estrogens that we produce. They're in our waters. But I think you also know another concept, which is concentration. And all of these PECs and PNECs are there with concentration, with a C, specifically for a reason. Of course, I told you before, the more we grow, and if we concentrate all our effluents into one wastewater plant, then it's going to be huge. If we can distribute, or if we have different ways of doing it, then we probably can solve one end of the problem. The other end of the problem
is how to take it back and avoid. The other one is responsible use, where you as pharmacists have a very important saying in the matter. Most of all, don't panic. We have time to solve this. We are addressing the problem. We will be putting measures as collectively as a society, and everyone will have their share of solutions, their cut of the pie, let's say it. But we all need to work for it. Industry is committed. I know wastewater treatment is also committed. It doesn't mean that we have found the perfect solution for everyone, but we're working on it. And also civil society is committed, and this is very important.
Well, I'll get back to my standard solution, the marking, or the green leaf, or what you call it. In the way, meaning information from pharmacists are crucial to inform the public on this matter. And I think that's the way forward. Pharmacists meet the patients more often than the prescribers do. They have the opportunity to inform about environmental issues. So please do.
There's a double message always coming from our side. Medicines are safe. I just saw it on on your slide. Well, if they're safe, why do we have a system that is very much focused on keeping them away from the public as much as possible? So, no, medicines are not safe. But that's not, of course, what you're going to tell your patients, because they're safe in relation to what they're being sold for. But that essentially makes the message complex, because why start warning and sell it OTC at the same time? So that makes no sense. So the challenge, I guess, to you is find ways of communicating this. Find ways of communicating the message that a substance is safe enough for its intended use, but in another shape or form or another area, it may not be as safe.
Yes, anyone else? Hi, Nikos Gendis. I'm quality product leader for Roche. And from my perspective, or for the perspective of the industry, I have a statement and a question. And being part of the company is number 2 in the sustainability index of Dow Jones for 2019 out of 23,000 companies. For us, it's a very sensitive topic to have once the pharmaceuticals in the environment, and second, even more important, is the sustainability in general. And first of all, my statement, I want to thank EPSA and all the participants of the panels to bring this topic here to discuss it, because it's one of the very, very important topics, and it's very good that we discuss it. And I see here in the room dozens of people. Most of us will be pharmacists one day, or are pharmacists, but all of us are also patients. And my question here to Frederick, but also to all the community pharmacists who are here, is in my daily business, I'm dealing with the quality oversight of a product end-to-end, from raw material to the patient. And we are part of projects where we directly collaborate with patients, with pharmacists, and pharmacies, to have an optimization on the supply chain, but also, for example, on the packaging configuration. So the product I'm dealing with, it's usually 9 capsules per day a patient needs to take. And in certain countries, we have like a setup that we have it in blisters. So in close collaboration with patients and a pharmacist, we were able, for example, to change the regulation in one country to have packaging configuration with big bottles. So also the packaging size, which was mentioned, is also a question: what is the drug consumed for? If it's a chronic disease. For us, it's unfortunately a lethal chronic disease. It's lung fibrosis. And my question here is to Frederick. My first question is, once you have the label, the green label, you said it's for the OTC products, but are you in collaboration or in contact with the industry to say why the one product gets a label, why the other not, or what is needed to get the label? And my second question to Frederick, but also all the community pharmacists in the room or on the panel is, are there in your daily work initiatives where you collaborate with the industry when you see somewhere there is a room for improvement on the sustainability, on the configuration of a package or something, to have something like optimized? And last but not least, I would make us all aware here, we will all are or will be one day patients in a certain sense, to have this kind of sensitivity. Thank you.
Well, the first question, yes, we are collaborating with the industry. Actually, we had a breakfast meeting just a couple of weeks ago where all companies were invited, so it was full house, really. And there are a large interest in Sweden to fulfill this criteria right now. And yes, I will say that we are, of course, open for collaborations in Sweden to find solutions and to find good packages for our patients. I don't know if there are any such collaborations going on right now. I haven't heard any, unfortunately. So, but I think we will, our members will be open for that kind of discussions. And the third question, sorry, I forgot that, but someone else can answer that one.
The third question was just a statement of awareness that the best project for optimization of packaging and supply to patients we had in the last couple of months and years were from ideas coming from patients reaching the pharmacy and giving us the idea to optimize. That was the statement.
And was that in collaboration with the insurance companies?
Sorry?
How were the insurance companies involved in this?
The insurance company have been in the certain projects, they have been involved, that it was a win-win situation for them as well.
Okay.
Because at the end of
that's
the day,
probably the key factor. Good.
Yes. Just before, we also have lots of different healthcare professionals here and also students, so don't hesitate, because these are your last minutes to ask a question.
I'm going to be really brief. I just wanted to react to your comments that Luis made, saying that the manufacturing pollution was the responsibility of the developing countries where APIs were manufactured, like China and in India. I kind of disagree with that. I think the responsibility is ours as Europeans. We decided to export the pollution to these countries because we wanted the prices to go down. And then now we realize that there are security issues, and that there are social issues and environmental issues. But this is our responsibility. And if we put on that criteria in the GMP framework, and if we make sure that the drugs that we market in Europe meet this criteria, this will make a huge difference. Of course, we cannot prevent these pharmaceutical companies in developing countries to not to use this criteria for other regions of the world, like you mentioned, Africa, Asia, and so on. This is true, but the impact that we can have as Europe, as a continent, is huge. I mean, the sales market of pharmaceuticals in Europe represents 225 billion euros. It's the second biggest market in terms of sales after the US. So if you do this in Europe, this will have a major impact. We cannot solve the whole globally the problem, but as a strong continent, we can use our soft power to make an impact and make a difference there. Thanks.
Thank you, Jean-Yves. I think we're on the same side of the barricade, but I also presented a solution, which is green procurement. So I did not just say we are unable to tackle the issue. I said green procurement is the way. The way I don't think GMP is the way is because you don't have the right professionals, and we have trade agreements with other countries that actually recognize GMPs, which means that I will not have to do an inspection, I will not have to ship my inspectors to the other side of the world, because I accept what the UK did, now I can say, and I also accept what the USA did, or Japan did. GMP is a grabber much like benefit risk would be, but these just don't apply. Even though we like to hammer it down, it's like when we have a hammer, every problem is a nail. There are other ways of tackling the problem, be it through green procurement, be it through extended environmental risk assessment, which actually has more benefit than just that one. And we're still having the problem, and I'm coming back to you, but it's linked with the price. Let's imagine in this wonderful world that we can just claim that all our production comes back to Europe. Where will that put the prices of medicines, and will we have the money for it? And if we don't, where are we willing to cut to pay for that? It's a huge political problem. It involves economy, it involves healthcare, it involves us as healthcare professionals. I mean, it involves the whole of social society. But if I have an inhaler, be it propellant or be it powder, if the one with propellant costs €1.50 and the one in powder costs 36, which one will you, not you as patient, which one will you as a state or as a payer, depending on kind of healthcare model you have in your country, will choose to pay?
Thank you very much. My name is Daniela Timush. I'm representing European Dental Students Association. First of all, congratulations to the whole EPSA team for bringing up this topic and for the excellent event, and also to the stakeholders and all the invitees and the panelists who are here today. Thank you for endorsing students' initiatives, because sometimes it's very hard to be taken serious regarding very interesting and important topics. My question is regarding One Health, the concept of One Health, interprofessional education and collaboration. How do you see the role of other healthcare professionals in the role of tackling pharmaceuticals in the environment? Because as it was mentioned, even dentists, doctors, veterinarians, they also have this impact on pharmaceuticals and the environment as well, because mess disposal is not something we are taught in our curricula. So my question is addressed to educators. Do you think this is an important issue? And if yes, do you already have some experience or best practices to share? To researchers, if they include in their projects that they conduct, if they include other healthcare professionals, and also to clinicians or practitioners, how can you contribute to making sure that other healthcare professionals are responsible and serious in tackling this issue? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I've been involved in what we call the pharmacotherapeutic counseling or conversations that are mandatory in our healthcare system. That means that pharmacists and doctors, they have to get together at least once a month to discuss pharmacotherapeutic items. And they can choose from all sorts of topics. And since 2 years, there's this topic, medicines, pharmaceutical residues in the environment. And then people from the water domain, they come present their case. People from the pharma domain will illustrate their case. That is much oriented towards preventing waste and trying to avoid giving out too much at the same time, which is really a big issue, because it saves a lot of money on the one end, but after 1 month the person changes medicine, and then there's this whole stack just doing nothing. So we teach them about that. We teach them how to engage the healthcare insurance companies, because they will start to ask questions. So they will have some answers provided. And we've noticed that there are still discrepancies between what we find in the surface waters and what is prescribed by doctors. And when I noticed the products, and it was carbamazepine, for instance, and we noticed that in the area where it's measured, there are mental institutes, and which is kind of where you expect this to happen or to be used. So now we are drawing in specific the people that work in the mental institutes. To teach them what they might be doing. We're pretty certain they are dumping unused medicines in the sink, but we're trying to educate them as well. And I'd like to thank you for the eye opener, because we probably have to involve dentists as well, and they have been not on our list yet, but I'm pretty certain that that's worthwhile. Thank you very much.
I pretty much fully agree with everything that you just said, but this is, at least to us as well, we definitely consider that it has to be like a whole healthcare sector, or at least these exact players that you mentioned. And I think even though the different professionals have slightly different roles, but I think we should all together aim at prudent use. I mean, that's after all the key to everything, and that's pretty much.
Maybe I just can add a few comments. Speaking for myself, and in Belgium, so I'm also teaching to hospital specialists, and indeed there is a need. The knowledge about making a good medical prescription, the way they can do it. In Belgium, you don't have to make a prescription just by writing down a medicine, a commercial product, but you can just indicate the treatment. So many capsules a day, so many days a treatment. So that's perfectly possible. But what we notice at university, that a lot of our young prescribers, they don't know, they have to learn it. And okay, that's what we do, that's what we encourage.
Yes, I will just align about the One Health. Yes, EPSA also supports that and has been working on it. We just recently launched our report on it, an updated report actually on the previous years. And yes, the implementation of One Health and in professional education is still very low. So considering from EPSA side, there are so many things to do that you don't even know where to start sometimes. Yes, I don't see any burning questions right now anymore. We have still we will still have cocktail reception, so you can ask there. I would like to conclude this event. Firstly, I would like to say why we chose this topic as EPSA. There are many reasons. One of the reasons was that students are interested in sustainability, including pharmaceuticals in the environment. This was talked from our member associations from all across Europe for the last 2 mandates. And yes, we finally did something on it. We finally addressed it, and we're very happy to have you here. And I think our initiative also proves that we want to know more, we want to learn more, and we want to do more. Now it's up to all of you to meet us halfway, or maybe even more, because, you know. Yes. I will also say that EPSA has already planned the future initiatives on the topic. We plan to launch a position on pharmaceuticals in the environment in connection to education. Right now the numbers are also very low, as probably expected. Then we will have public health campaigns. One already happened today in front of the European Parliament. And we will also advocate for Med's disposal as the co-signatures of it. And following this event, we will also have online discussions forum to go more into maybe students' opinion on it and possibly solutions also. Yes, I will also extend the invitation to all of you, of course. Lastly, I would like to thank the whole EPSA team for their proactivity today. This was a really hard challenge, and I think we've proven that the students can make things work even when everything is against us. and pharmacists to be can also be event crisis managers. Yeah. I would also like to thank the Renaissance Hotel for allowing us to be here and meeting us more than halfway for sure. I would like to thank all the panelists, experts from all the professions, policymakers, legislators, MEPs, commissioners from the Commission, and so on. But lastly, also participants, because all of those that I mentioned, if one was missing, this event would not happen. So yes, thank you for that. Yes, as I said, we've proven that against all the odds, we can deliver an event successfully in 18 hours, almost as perfectly as in weeks of planning in the European Parliament. So thank you. Let's move to the cocktail reception and enjoy, network and meet. Thank you.